43 fpf, clear skies with no moon. The diesel engine's rhythmic rumble had been Vincent Kellerman's lullaby for 15 years. Tonight, as he guided his crimson Peterbilt 37-9 through the pitch-black desert highway, that familiar sound felt different, ominous, like a countdown timer he couldn't see. The CB radio crackled with static, occasional trucker chatter cutting through the white noise as he adjusted his grip on the worn steering wheel. Vincent was 42 years old, weathered by countless miles and desert sun, with hands that told stories of every load he'd ever hauled. His logbook sat open on the passenger seat, entries meticulously recorded in his careful handwriting, a habit that had kept him out of trouble with DOT inspectors for over a decade. The latest entry read, "Departed Bakersfield 8:15 p.m. Destination Phoenix, ETA 6. What the logbook didn't record was the growing unease that had been gnawing at him since he'd left the way station 60 miles back. 3 times now he'd noticed the same set of headlights in his mirrors, always maintaining exactly the same distance, never passing, never falling behind. In the trucking world, coincidences like that didn't exist. The highway stretched ahead like a black ribbon cutting through the Mojave, illuminated only by his headlights carving through the darkness. No streetlights, no other traffic, just the endless asphalt and the vast emptiness that swallowed everything beyond his truck's reach. The radio had lost its last station 30 miles ago, leaving only the engine's drone and the whisper of wind against his cab. Vincent reached for his thermos, finding it empty. The bitter taste of cold coffee still lingered on his tongue as he checked his fuel gauge. 3/4 full, enough to reach Phoenix without stopping. But something was wrong. Those headlights were still there, and they'd been there far too long for comfort. He keyed his CB radio, switching to channel 19. Breaker 19. This is Red Devil eastbound on I-40, mile marker 24/7. Any drivers out there copy? Static answered him. Then, after a long moment, a voice emerged from the white noise, gravelly, unfamiliar. Red Devil. This is Nighthawk. I copy. What's your 20? About 40 miles west of Needles. You see any bears out here tonight? Negative on the bears, Red Devil. Road's been quiet, real quiet. Vincent glanced in his mirror. Again. The headlights had moved closer. Nighthawk, you happen to see a set of lights been following eastbound traffic? The radio crackled when Nighthawk's voice returned. It carried a different tone. Red Devil, I'm not showing any eastbound traffic on my end. You sure about those lights? A chill ran down Vincent's spine. He looked in his mirror again. The lights were definitely there. Maybe 200 yards back, matching his speed exactly. Positive. Nighthawk, they have been on me for 60 miles. Red Devil, I'm looking at an empty road here. You might want to... The transmission cut to static. Vincent tried raising Nighthawk again, then switched channels, trying to reach any driver, any voice in the darkness. Nothing but empty static answered him. The headlights in his mirror suddenly accelerated, closing the distance rapidly. Vincent's pulse quickened as he pressed harder on the accelerator, his fully loaded rig responding slowly to the demand for speed. 60 miles per hour became 65, then 70. The lights stayed with him. That's when he saw the turnoff ahead, an unmarked dirt road leading into the desert, barely visible in his headlights. It wasn't on any of his maps, and he'd driven this route hundreds of times. Roads didn't just appear in the middle of nowhere. The vehicle behind him was close enough now that he could see it wasn't a truck. The headlight pattern was wrong, too low, too wide apart. It looked like a car, but what car could maintain highway speeds for 60 miles in the middle of the desert night? Vincent's training kicked in. 15 years of over-the-road trucking had taught him when to trust his instincts. And right now, every instinct screamed danger. He began to slow down, preparing to take the mystery turnoff, rather than let whatever was behind him get any closer. As he downshifted, his headlights swept across a sign he'd never seen before. Sanctuary Junction. Services available. 24 hours. The lettering looked fresh, the metal sign gleaming as if it had been installed yesterday. The pursuing vehicle had dropped back again, maintaining that exact distance that had haunted him for the past hour. Vincent made his decision and turned onto the dirt road, his truck's suspension groaning as it left the smooth asphalt for packed earth and gravel. The road was better maintained than he'd expected, wide enough for his rig and surprisingly smooth. It curved gently through low hills dotted with Joshua trees and desert scrub, their twisted silhouettes creating an alien landscape in his headlights. After 3 miles, he crested a small rise and saw lights ahead, a cluster of buildings that definitely hadn't been there on his last run through this area 2 weeks ago. Sanctuary Junction consisted of a fuel station, a small diner, and what looked like a motel, all connected by covered walkways and surrounded by parking areas large enough to accommodate several big rigs. Warm yellow light spilled from the windows, and Vincent could see figures moving inside the diner. The fuel station's sign displayed current diesel prices, and the pumps looked modern, professional. Most importantly, the vehicle that had been following him was nowhere to be seen. Vincent pulled into the truck parking area and shut down his engine. The sudden silence was almost overwhelming after hours of diesel rumble. He sat for a moment, studying the facility through his windshield. Everything looked normal, welcoming even, but something felt off. The lights were too bright, the buildings too clean, too perfect for a desert truck stop that supposedly operated around the clock. He climbed down from his cab, his joints protesting after 11 hours of driving. The desert air was crisp and carried the faint scent of sage and creosote. As he walked toward the fuel station office, he noticed other trucks parked in the shadows, a blue Kenworth, a white Freightliner, an older Mack with New Mexico plates. Their drivers were probably inside the diner, grabbing coffee and a meal. The fuel station's glass doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and Vincent stepped into air-conditioned comfort. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 30s with dark hair and kind eyes, wearing a uniform shirt with Isabella embroidered above the pocket. "Evening," she said with a warm smile. "Kind of late to be rolling through here." "Yeah, well, you know how it is," Vincent replied, approaching the counter. "Need to fuel up and maybe grab some coffee." "Been a long night." Isabella nodded toward the coffee station in the corner. "Help yourself, coffee's fresh. Fuel's on pump 3. Just pull around when you are ready." As Vincent poured coffee into a styrofoam cup, he glanced around the station. It was stocked like any other truck stop. Snacks, drinks, basic supplies, trucker logs. Nothing unusual except for the nagging feeling that he was forgetting something important. "Excuse me," he said to Isabella. "This place been here long? I drive this route regular, and I don't remember seeing it before." Isabella's smile faltered for just a moment. "Oh, we have been here a while. Maybe you just never needed to stop before." She gestured toward the parking area. "Looks like you have got company out there. Popular night for truckers." Vincent looked through the windows at the other trucks. Something about them bothered him, but he couldn't put his finger on what. They were just parked there, dark and silent, no signs of their drivers. "Those guys all inside the diner?" he asked. "Most likely. Rita serves good food, and the portions are generous. You hungry?" "Diner's just across the way." Vincent nodded, though he wasn't particularly hungry. What he really wanted was to talk to another driver, to verify that he wasn't losing his mind. The entire night had been surreal, from the mysterious follower to this truck stop that shouldn't exist. He paid for his coffee and a candy bar, then walked across the covered walkway to the diner. The windows glowed warmly, and he could see occupied booths inside. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and the smell of bacon and coffee welcomed him. The diner was decorated in classic American road style, red vinyl booths, checkered floor tiles, vintage road signs on the walls. A waitress with graying hair and a name tag reading Rita looked up from behind the counter. "Evening on. Grab any seat you like. Coffee?" "Sure," Vincent said, sliding into an empty booth near the window where he could keep an eye on his truck. Rita brought him a cup and a menu, then returned to her conversation with the other customers. That's when Vincent realized something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The diner had 8 other occupied booths, and in each one sat a single man, all wearing the typical attire of long-haul truckers: flannel shirts, baseball caps, work boots. They all had coffee cups and half-eaten meals in front of them. But none of them were talking. None of them were moving. They all sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead with empty expressions, as if they were waiting for something that would never come. Vincent's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as his hand began to shake. He looked more carefully at the nearest trucker, a heavy-set man with a graying beard, wearing a Peterbilt cap. The man's eyes were open, but they didn't blink. His chest didn't rise and fall with breathing. Fighting panic, Vincent stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Rita looked over with that same warm smile. "Leaving so soon, hon? You barely touched your coffee." I need to get back on the road," Vincent managed. "Early delivery. Of course. Drive safe out there. The desert can be dangerous at night." Vincent hurried out of the diner, his mind racing. Those men weren't sleeping or resting. They were something else entirely, something that made his skin crawl and his survival instincts scream warning. He reached his truck and climbed into the cab, his hands shaking as he reached for his keys. The engine turned over immediately, and he'd never been more grateful for the familiar sound of diesel power. As he prepared to pull out, movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. The other trucks, the ones that had been dark and silent, were starting up one by one. Their running lights flickered on, and diesel engines rumbled to life in a staggered sequence, like dominoes falling in slow motion. Vincent didn't wait to see what would happen next. He put his rig in gear and pulled out of the parking area, heading back toward the dirt road that led to the highway. In his mirrors, he watched the other trucks begin to move, forming a convoy that followed him at the exact same distance that mysterious vehicle had maintained earlier. The dirt road seemed longer on the way out, stretching endlessly through the dark desert. Vincent pushed his speed as much as he dared on the gravel surface, his truck's headlights sweeping across the Joshua trees and revealing nothing but empty landscape ahead. When he finally reached the highway, he didn't hesitate. He turned east toward Phoenix and floored the accelerator. His fully loaded rig slowly gained speed, and he watched his mirrors for any sign of pursuit. The other trucks had stopped at the highway junction, their headlights visible as distant stars in his mirrors. But they weren't following. They just sat there, idling in the darkness. Vincent reached for his CB radio. "Mayday. Mayday. This is Red Devil eastbound on I-40. Any driver, any base station, anybody cop." Static. Then faintly a familiar voice. "Red Devil, this is Nighthawk. You sound distressed, driver. What's your situation?" "Nighthawk, I need you to listen carefully. There's something wrong at mile marker 24/7. There's a truck stop there that shouldn't exist." The radio exploded with feedback, a piercing shriek that made Vincent tear off his headset. When the sound faded and he put the headset back on, he heard only empty static. He drove hard for the next 2 hours, not stopping until he reached a well-lit truck stop in Kingman, Arizona. The facility was busy with normal late-night trucker traffic, and Vincent had never been so happy to see ordinary people living ordinary lives. At the fuel desk, he asked the clerk about Sanctuary Junction. "Never heard of it," the young man said, consulting a computer terminal. "I show all the truck stops between here and Barstow, and there's nothing called Sanctuary Junction." Vincent bought a detailed road atlas and spread it across a table in the driver's lounge. The highway was clearly marked, but there was no sign of any turnoff or facility at mile marker. According to the map, that stretch of road ran through empty desert with no services for 50 miles in either direction. But Vincent knew what he'd seen. He had the receipt from the fuel station in his pocket, time-stamped 12:43 a.m., October 14, 1997. The paper was real, the ink was real, and the $3.50 he'd paid for coffee and a candy bar was definitely missing from his wallet. He tried calling his dispatcher from a payphone, but got only an answering machine. The Kellerman transport office wouldn't open for another 6 hours. Vincent left a message saying he'd been delayed, but would make his Phoenix delivery on time. What he didn't say was that he'd already decided this would be his last run. 15 years on the road had taught him to recognize when something was trying to tell him it was time to quit. Tonight had been that message, delivered in the most terrifying way possible. Vincent climbed back into his truck and resumed his journey toward Phoenix. As the miles passed and the eastern horizon began to show the first faint hints of dawn, he tried to rationalize what had happened. Fatigue could cause hallucinations. Desert highways were notorious for playing tricks on drivers' minds. Maybe he'd microslept and dreamed the entire episode, but the receipt in his pocket argued otherwise. As the sun rose over the Arizona desert, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson, Vincent made his delivery in Phoenix right on schedule. The warehouse workers who unloaded his agricultural equipment noticed nothing unusual about him or his truck. To them, he was just another trucker completing another routine run. Vincent filed his paperwork, cleaned out his cab, and turned in his truck keys to the dispatcher. He gave 2 weeks' notice, citing personal reasons, and caught a Greyhound bus back to his small apartment in Riverside, California. He never drove a truck again. The receipt from Sanctuary Junction went into a shoebox under his bed, along with his final logbook and a detailed account of that night that he wrote, but never showed to anyone. Over the years, he occasionally searched maps and made phone calls, trying to find some trace of the place he'd visited. He found nothing. Vincent Kellerman spent the rest of his life working in a hardware store, helping customers find screws and paint and garden hoses. He married a kindergarten teacher named Dorothy, bought a small house with a white picket fence, and lived what most people would consider a perfectly normal life. But every October 13th he would drive out to I-40 and park at mile marker 2047. He would sit in his car until midnight, watching the empty desert and waiting for lights that never appeared. The road remained dark and empty, showing no sign that Sanctuary Junction had ever existed. Vincent died of a heart attack in 2019, 22 years after his last truck run. Dorothy found the shoebox under their bed while cleaning out his belongings. The receipt had faded but was still legible. Sanctuary Junction, thank you for your business, come back soon. She also found Vincent's account of that night, written in his careful handwriting on yellow legal paper. At the bottom of the last page, he'd added a note dated just 6 months before his death. I have been thinking about that night for over 20 years, and I have come to believe that I wasn't the first trucker to stop at Sanctuary Junction. Those men in the diner, they had the look of drivers who'd been on the road too long, men who'd forgotten there was anything else but the endless highway. Maybe that's what the place was for. Maybe it was where truckers went when they couldn't find their way back to the real world. I think I was supposed to stay. I think that's why the other trucks followed me to the highway, but didn't pursue. They were giving me a choice, and I chose to leave. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed. Would I have joined those silent men in the diner, waiting for something that would never come? Or would I have found something else, something that made the endless highway seem like paradise? I will never know, but I keep going back to that mile marker, year after year, because I can't shake the feeling that Sanctuary Junction is still out there, waiting for truckers who have lost their way. And someday, maybe someone else will see those lights in the desert and make a different choice than I did. I just hope they know what they are choosing. Dorothy Kellerman kept her husband's account and the faded receipt, but she never made the October 13th pilgrimage to mile marker 2047. She thought Vincent's story was either a product of road fatigue or an elaborate fiction he'd created to explain why he'd suddenly quit the job he'd loved. She was wrong on both counts. The story was true, and Vincent hadn't quit because he was afraid. He'd quit because he'd glimpsed something vast and alien that operated by rules he couldn't understand, and he'd been wise enough to recognize that some mysteries were too dangerous to solve. But mysteries have a way of finding solutions, whether people want them or not. And in the summer of 2023, 26 years after Vincent Kellerman's last run, someone else would stumble upon evidence that Sanctuary Junction was more than just a trucker's fevered imagination. The someone was Elena Vasquez, and she owned a fuel station in Barstow, California. The evidence would come in the form of a discovery that would shake her understanding of reality and force her to confront the possibility that some places exist outside the normal flow of time and space. But that discovery was still years away. For now, Vincent's account remained hidden in a shoebox, a testament to one man's encounter with the impossible and his decision to choose life over mystery. The desert kept its secrets, and Sanctuary Junction waited in the spaces between what is and what might be, its lights ready to guide lost travelers toward destinations that didn't appear on any map. And somewhere in the darkness beyond mile marker 24/7, trucks still moved in endless convoy, carrying loads that would never be delivered to destinations that existed only in the minds of drivers who had forgotten how to stop driving. The road goes on forever, and the highway never ends. Barstow, California, July 19, 2017. Temperature 72 Fahrenheit. Scattered clouds with intermittent moonlight. Elena Vasquez had been staring at the security monitor for 3 minutes, her coffee growing cold in the styrofoam cup beside her keyboard. The timestamp in the corner read 2:14 a.m., July 19, 2023. But what she was seeing on the screen had supposedly happened 26 years ago. The footage showed a red Peterbilt 37-9 pulling into her fuel station's parking lot, its driver climbing down from the cab and walking toward the building. The image quality was surprisingly crisp for 1997 technology, too crisp in fact. Her current security system had been installed only 2 years ago, replacing equipment that hadn't existed when this truck supposedly visited. Elena owned Desert Oasis Fuel, a 24-hour truck stop on the outskirts of Barstow that served long-haul drivers traveling between Los Angeles and Las Vegas. She'd inherited the business from her uncle Rodrigo 3 years ago, along with boxes of old paperwork, maintenance records, and apparently security footage that defied the laws of time and technology. The discovery had started innocently enough. Elena had been upgrading the station's digital storage system, transferring old surveillance files to new servers. Most of the archived footage was exactly what she'd expected: mundane interactions between customers and staff, the occasional minor incident, years of routine business operations. But buried in the directory structure, she'd found a folder labeled Anomalous Events, Archive, Do Not Delete. Inside were 17 video files, each showing the same red Peterbilt, arriving at different times over the past 26 years. The dates ranged from October 13, 1997, to as recently as every October 13th, without fail, at exactly 2:14. Elena had called her head of security, Miguel Torres, but he'd gone home hours ago. She'd tried calling her uncle's old friend, former police sergeant Raymond Hutchins, but his phone went straight to voicemail. At 2:17 a.m. on a Wednesday night, she was alone with a mystery that made her question her sanity. The current video file showed the truck driver walking toward her building, but Elena knew that was impossible. Her fuel station was brightly lit and fully operational, with herself clearly visible behind the counter. Yet the security camera showed her building dark and empty, as if it were closed for business. She minimized the video window and pulled up the live feed from the same camera. The parking lot was empty except for 2 big rigs whose drivers were sleeping in their cabs. No red Peterbilt, no mysterious visitor, just the normal desert night that surrounded her station like a vast patient predator. Elena returned to the archived footage and noticed something she'd missed before. In the background of the video, barely visible at the edge of the camera's range, she could see lights in the distance. lights that had no business being there. According to every map and survey, the area beyond her property was empty desert for 50 miles. She opened her laptop and pulled up Google Earth, zooming in on the coordinates that corresponded to those distant lights. The satellite imagery showed nothing but scrubland and Joshua trees, but the timestamp on the satellite photo was from April 2023, months before she'd discovered these videos. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop watching. Some things are better left alone." Her blood turned to ice water. She looked around the station, checking every corner and shadow visible through the windows. The parking lot remained empty, the desert silent. She tried calling the number back, but it went directly to a disconnected message. Another text arrived. "The truck stops when the watching stops." Elena's hands trembled as she closed the laptop. She'd always prided herself on being rational, practical, focused on the real world of fuel sales and profit margins. She didn't believe in ghosts or time travel or any of the supernatural nonsense that tourists came to the desert hoping to find. But the evidence on her screen suggested that belief was irrelevant. Something was happening here, something that had been happening for 26 years, and she was apparently the first person to notice. She walked to the front windows and stared out at the highway. I-40 stretched away in both directions, illuminated by her station's lights for a few hundred yards before disappearing into darkness. Traffic was light at this hour. A few cars, the occasional truck, nothing unusual. But as she watched, headlights appeared in the distance, moving slowly from the west. Even at this distance, Elena could see it was a big rig, and something about its profile looked familiar. Her stomach clenched as the truck drew closer, its chrome catching the light from her station's sign. It was red. It was a Peterbilt, and it was slowing down. Elena grabbed her phone and dialed 911, but the call wouldn't connect. She tried again, then checked her signal strength. Full bars, but no matter what number she dialed, the calls failed to go through. Even her internet connection had died, leaving her completely cut off from the outside world. The red truck pulled into her parking lot, its air brakes hissing as it came to a stop in the exact same position shown in the security footage. The driver's door opened, and a man climbed down from the cab. He was tall and lean, wearing faded jeans and a flannel shirt, with work boots that had seen thousands of miles. His face was weathered by sun and wind, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd been driving too long without rest. He walked toward the building with purposeful strides, but there was something wrong with his movement, a slight delay as if he were walking through water. Elena ducked below the counter, her heart hammering against her ribs. The bell above the front door chimed, and she heard footsteps on the tile floor. "Evening," said a voice that sounded like gravel on asphalt. "Need to fuel up and maybe grab some coffee." Elena forced herself to stand up, plastering on the professional smile that had served her well in the customer service industry. The man standing before her looked exactly like the driver in the security footage, down to the oil stain on his left sleeve and the trucker's cap with Kellerman Transport embroidered above the bill. "Of course," she managed. "Coffee's fresh. Fuel's on pump 3. The man nodded and walked to the coffee station. Elena watched him pour coffee into a styrofoam cup, his movements precise but somehow disconnected, as if he were performing a routine he'd practiced thousands of times. He selected a candy bar from the rack and approached the counter. "That will be $3.50, Elena said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. According to the archived footage, this exact transaction had taken place dozens of times over the past 26 years. The man handed her a $20 bill, and Elena's skin crawled when their fingers touched. His hand was cold, not just cool but genuinely cold, like touching metal in winter. The bill itself felt wrong, too old and too new at the same time. As she made change, Elena noticed the man's eyes never quite focused on her. He looked through her, past her, as if she were a projection rather than a real person. When she handed him his change, he pocketed it without counting and turned to leave. Wait, Elena called out, surprising herself with her boldness. What's your name? The man paused at the door, his hand on the handle. When he turned back, his expression was confused, as if she'd asked him a question in a foreign language. Vincent, he said after a long moment. Vincent Kellerman. Where are you headed, Vincent? Phoenix. Early delivery. He frowned, and for a moment his eyes seemed to focus on her properly. Have we done this before? Elena's throat felt dry as sand. I think maybe we have. Vincent stared at her for several seconds, and she could see him struggling with some internal conflict. His face cycled through expressions: confusion, recognition, fear, and finally, resignation. I should go, he said. The road's waiting. He left the station, and Elena watched through the windows as he climbed back into his truck. The Peterbilt's engine rumbled to life, and she noticed that despite the advanced age suggested by the security footage dates, the truck looked pristine, as if it had just rolled off the assembly line. As Vincent pulled out of the parking lot, Elena's phone suddenly burst to life with a flood of delayed messages and missed calls. Her internet connection restored itself, and the normal sounds of the desert night returned. Crickets, distant traffic, the hum of her refrigeration units. She immediately called Miguel Torres, not caring that it was nearly 3. Elena, Miguel's voice was thick with sleep. What's wrong? I need you to come in, right now, and bring Raymond Hutchins if you can reach him. Are you in danger? Should I call the police? Elena looked out at the empty parking lot, then at the security monitor showing normal late-night footage. I don't think the police would believe this. Just come, please. While she waited for Miguel, Elena researched Vincent Kellerman and Kellerman Transport on her laptop. She found obituaries, business records, and insurance claims. Vincent Kellerman had indeed been a truck driver who'd worked for Kellerman Transport, a small family trucking company based in Riverside, California. He'd died of a heart attack in 2019 at the age of 64. According to the records, Vincent had quit long-haul trucking in October 1997, citing personal reasons. He'd spent the rest of his life working in a hardware store and had been survived by his wife Dorothy, who had died just 6 months ago. Elena found Dorothy's estate sale listing and nearly dropped her laptop. Among the items being sold were vintage trucking memorabilia, including logbooks, receipts, and personal papers from deceased husband's trucking career. The sale had taken place 3 weeks ago at a house in Riverside. Elena called the estate sale company, and after some persuasion got the contact information for the family member who'd handled Dorothy's belongings. Mrs. Kellerman kept everything, said Dorothy's niece, Janet Walsh, when Elena reached her an hour later. She had boxes and boxes of Vincent's old stuff. Most of it we donated or threw away, but there were some things that seemed important. Personal papers, a journal he kept. Things like that. What happened to those papers? We weren't sure what to do with them, so we donated them to the Transportation History Museum in Pomona. They have a section on trucking history, and Vincent's stuff seemed like it might be valuable to researchers. Elena hung up and immediately called the museum, leaving a detailed voicemail explaining her interest in Vincent Kellerman's papers. She knew it would be hours before anyone returned her call, but at least she had a lead. Miguel arrived at 4:30 a.m., followed 20 minutes later by Raymond Hutchins. Both men looked skeptical until Elena showed them the archived security footage. This is impossible, Raymond said, studying the videos. I have been a cop for 30 years, and I have never seen anything like this. Miguel was more practical. Could someone be hacking your system? Playing back old footage? With what equipment? Elena asked. And how would they coordinate it with an actual truck showing up? I saw him, talked to him. He was real. People can't come back from the dead, Elena, Raymond said gently. There has to be another explanation. Elena pulled up Vincent Kellerman's obituary on her laptop. Then explained this. The man I just sold coffee to has been dead for 4 years. The three of them spent the next 2 hours reviewing every piece of evidence Elena had collected. The security footage was consistent across 26 years, always showing the same truck, the same driver, the same transaction. The timestamps were always October 13th, at exactly 2:14. "There's a pattern here," Miguel observed. "It's not random. Something specific is happening on that date." Raymond nodded. "In police work, patterns usually mean someone or something is driving the events. We need to figure out what October 13th means." Elena researched the date, looking for historical events, astronomical phenomena, anything that might explain its significance. She found references to various historical incidents, but nothing that seemed connected to trucking or the desert. Then she found something interesting. October 13th, 1997, had been a new moon, the darkest night of the month. Every subsequent October 13th that appeared in her security footage had also been a new moon. "He only comes when the moon is dark," Elena said. "When the night is at its blackest. That's when the barriers are thinnest," said a voice from behind them. Elena spun around to find a woman standing in the doorway, elderly, Hispanic, wearing a simple black dress and carrying a canvas bag. She hadn't heard the bell chime when the woman entered. "I'm sorry," Elena said. "We are closed." "No, you are not," the woman interrupted. "You are never closed. That's the problem." Raymond stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving toward where his service weapon used to be. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The woman smiled sadly. "I'm Esperanza Morales. I have been watching this place for 40 years, waiting for someone to finally see what I have been seeing." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "What have you been seeing?" "The lost ones. The drivers who took the wrong turn and never found their way back. They keep coming here, night after night, trying to remember how to stop driving." Esperanza walked to the windows and gazed out at the desert. "This place sits on a crossroads, child. Not just of highways, but of possibilities. Some places are thin, where the normal world touches something else. Your fuel station was built on one of those places." "That's impossible," Miguel said. "Is it? You have seen the footage. You have met Vincent Kellerman. Tell me what's impossible about a dead man buying coffee." Elena found herself drawn to the woman's calm certainty. "Why Vincent? Why does he keep coming back?" "Because he's trapped in the moment he made his choice. October 13th, 1997, the night he decided to leave the road instead of joining the others at Sanctuary Junction. But some choices echo across time, especially when they are made in places like this." "Sanctuary Junction?" Elena's pulse quickened. "What's Sanctuary Junction?" Esperanza turned back to them, her dark eyes holding depths that seemed much older than her appearance suggested. "The place where lost drivers go when they can't find their way home. It exists in the spaces between reality, drawing in truckers who have been on the road too long to remember anything else." She reached into her canvas bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. Vincent Kellerman left something behind. A record of what he encountered that night. His wife kept it hidden for 26 years. But some secrets are too important to stay buried. Elena opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photocopies of handwritten pages, a faded receipt, and several photographs that made her blood freeze. The photos showed the interior of a diner filled with motionless men, their faces blank and staring, cups of coffee growing cold before them. "How did you get these?" "Dorothy Kellerman was my cousin," Esperanza said. "She gave them to me before she died, along with instructions to bring them here if anyone ever started asking the right questions." Elena read Vincent's account, her understanding of reality crumbling with each page. The description of Sanctuary Junction matched the distant lights she'd seen in her security footage. A truck stop that existed in the spaces between what was real and what was possible. "The truckers in the diner," Elena said. "Are they dead?" "Not dead. Not alive. They are caught in a loop, reliving the same moment over and over. They chose the road over everything else, and now the road is all they have. Raymond had been silent throughout Esperanza's explanation, but now he spoke up. Assuming any of this is true, and I'm not saying it is, what does it have to do with Elena's station? Vincent comes here because this is where he learned to choose. Every October 13th, he relives that choice, trying to understand what would have happened if he'd stayed on the highway instead of taking the turnoff to Sanctuary Junction. Esperanza walked to Elena's computer and pointed at the screen, showing the archived footage. But something's changed. The pattern is accelerating. Look at the timestamps. Elena scrolled through the video files and noticed what Esperanza meant. For the first 20 years, Vincent's visits had occurred exactly once per year. But in the last 6 years, the intervals had been getting shorter. October 13th, 2017, September 13th, 2018. The most recent file was dated July 13th, 2023, 6 days ago. He's coming more frequently, Elena whispered. The barrier is weakening, Esperanza confirmed. Whatever keeps Sanctuary Junction separate from our reality is breaking down. If it fails completely, those lost drivers won't be trapped anymore. They will be free to roam the highways, pulling other drivers into their endless convoy. Miguel was staring at the computer screen with growing alarm. How many drivers are we talking about? Hundreds, maybe thousands. Every trucker who's ever vanished without a trace. Every driver who disappeared on a lonely highway and was never found. They are all there, waiting in the spaces between reality. Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. What can we do? Vincent is the key, Esperanza said. He's the only one who ever escaped Sanctuary Junction by choice. If we can help him break free from the loop, if we can help him truly choose, it might stabilize the barrier. How? The next time he comes, you have to make him remember. Help him understand that he's already made his choice, that he doesn't need to keep reliving it. Elena looked at the archived footage showing Vincent's last visit. According to the pattern Esperanza had identified, he would return in 6 days, July 25th at 2 hours. What if I can't reach him? What if he's too far gone? Esperanza's expression was grim. Then Sanctuary Junction spills into our world, and every highway becomes a hunting ground for drivers who forgot how to stop driving. The old woman gathered her belongings and headed for the door. I will be back before the 25th. There are preparations to make, protections to put in place. This battle has been 26 years in the making, and we only get one chance to win it. As Esperanza left, Elena turned to Miguel and Raymond. You both think I'm crazy, don't you? Miguel shrugged. I have seen the footage. I can't explain it, but I can't deny it either. Raymond was more cautious. I think there's something happening here that's beyond normal experience. Whether it's supernatural or just technology we don't understand, I'm not sure it matters. If there's a chance that innocent people could be in danger, we have an obligation to act. Elena nodded, grateful for their support even in the face of the impossible. 6 days. We have 6 days to figure out how to save a dead man's soul. Outside, the desert wind began to pick up, carrying with it the faint sound of diesel engines and the whisper of rubber on asphalt. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the highway, Sanctuary Junction waited with patient hunger, its lights ready to guide lost travelers toward a destination that existed only in the spaces between heartbeats. The countdown had begun. The vanishing route. Part 3. The preparation. Barstow, California. July 20, 7:40. Temperature, 89 degrees. Clear skies with rising wind. 3 days before Vincent Kellerman's predicted return, Elena Vasquez stood in the storage room behind her fuel station, surrounded by boxes of evidence that painted a picture of supernatural horror stretching back decades. The Transportation History Museum in Pomona had been more cooperative than she'd hoped, shipping Vincent's complete archives within 48 hours of her request. The boxes contained Vincent's trucking logs dating back to 1982, route maps marked with strange annotations, and most disturbing of all, a collection of missing persons reports he'd apparently been gathering for 15 years after quitting the road. Each report described a long-haul trucker who'd vanished without explanation on a desert highway. Miguel Torres sat at a folding table, organizing the reports by date and location. "Look at this pattern," he said, spreading out a highway map of the southwestern United States. "All the disappearances cluster around certain routes. I-40 through the Mojave, I-15 through Nevada, I-10 across Arizona. It's like there's a network of, what would you call them, hunting grounds." Elena picked up one of the reports, dated March 15, 2003. Jeremiah Colt, age 38, driving for Interstate Logistics. Last radio contact at mile marker 19.3 on I-40, East truck and trailer found abandoned at a rest stop, 60 miles away. Engines still running, driver's personal effects undisturbed. "That's 12 miles from here," Raymond Hutchins observed from across the room. He'd taken vacation time to help with the investigation, though he'd made it clear he still harbored doubts about the supernatural explanation. "Whatever's happening, it's been happening in our backyard for decades." The bell above the front door chimed, and Elena looked up to see Esperanza Morales entering the station. The elderly woman moved with purpose, carrying several canvas bags and what appeared to be a wooden box carved with intricate symbols. "The preparations are ready," Esperanza announced, "but first you need to understand what you are truly facing." She led them to the main counter and opened the wooden box, revealing an array of items that seemed to belong in a museum of folk magic: crystalline formations, bundles of dried herbs, small metal objects that caught the light in unusual ways. "Sanctuary Junction isn't just a truck stop," Esperanza explained. "It's a collection point, a way station between dimensions. The truckers who end up there aren't just lost. They have been deliberately gathered." Elena felt a chill despite the desert heat. Gathered by what? Something that feeds on motion, on the endless journey without destination. It takes drivers who have lost their connection to everything except the highway and transforms them into harvesters. Miguel looked up from the missing persons reports. Harvesters of what? Other drivers. The convoy that follows lost truckers isn't trying to help them. It's herding them towards Sanctuary Junction. Every disappearance creates another harvester, and every harvester can capture more drivers. Esperanza pulled out a photograph from one of her bags, an aerial view of a truck stop that looked perfectly normal, except for the complete absence of shadows. Despite bright sunshine in the photo, nothing cast shadows. Not the buildings, not the vehicles, not even the fuel pumps. "This was taken by a highway patrol helicopter in 1999, she said. "The pilot reported seeing lights in the desert, but when he investigated, he found nothing. The photograph developed normally, but look at the timestamp." Elena examined the photo. The digital timestamp read, October 13th doesn't have 13 hours, Raymond pointed out. "Exactly. Time works differently at Sanctuary Junction. It exists in the spaces between seconds, in the pause between heartbeats. That's why Vincent keeps returning at exactly 2:14 a.m. He's trapped in the moment when time hiccups." Elena studied Vincent's handwritten account again, focusing on details she'd previously overlooked. He mentioned other trucks starting up when he left. "How many trucks are we talking about?" "Based on the missing persons reports and my own research, I estimate there are between 800 and 1,200 drivers currently trapped at Sanctuary Junction. If the barrier fails completely, they will all be released simultaneously onto the highway system." The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. 1,200 supernatural trucks hunting for new victims. The highways would become death traps. "Worse than that," Esperanza said grimly. "Once free, they wouldn't be limited to October 13th. They could hunt every night, gathering drivers continuously. Within a year, every major trucking route in America would be compromised." Miguel had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. "Why Vincent? If there are hundreds of trapped drivers, why is he the only one who keeps coming back here?" "Because he's the one who got away. His escape created a crack in Sanctuary Junction's containment. Every year on the anniversary of his escape, that crack widens slightly. But it also gives him a chance to return, not to Sanctuary Junction, but to the moment of his choice. Elena understood. He's reliving the decision to turn off the highway. Every time he comes here, he's choosing again whether to investigate those lights or keep driving. But he always makes the same choice, Raymond observed. He always investigates, because he doesn't remember that he already escaped. The loop erases his memory of everything after the moment he turned onto that dirt road. To him, it's always the first time. Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders again. So how do we break the loop? Esperanza began arranging items from her wooden box on the counter. We make him remember. Not just the night he escaped, but everything that came after: his marriage, his quiet life, his death, his wife's death, all of it. Won't that be traumatic for him? Less traumatic than spending eternity trapped in a single moment of uncertainty. Elena picked up one of the crystalline formations. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with its own internal light. What are these for? Anchors. They will help keep you grounded in this reality while you are interacting with Vincent. Without them, you could be pulled into his loop. Me? Elena's voice cracked. I thought you would. It has to be you. You are the one he's been visiting. You are the connection between his trapped consciousness and the real world. Raymond stepped forward. This is too dangerous. Elena, you can't. Yes, I can. Elena's voice was steadier than she felt. If I don't try and those trucks are released, how many people will die? How many families will lose someone on the highways? Esperanza nodded approvingly. The ritual must begin at exactly 2:30 a.m. on July 25th. You will have 14 minutes to reach Vincent before he arrives at 2:14. During that time, you will be partially existing in his timeline. She handed Elena a leather pouch containing several of the glowing crystals. Keep these with you at all times. If you feel yourself starting to fade or if your memories begin to blur, hold tight to the crystals and focus on this moment, this place, this choice you are making now. Elena tied the pouch to her belt. The crystal's warmth was reassuring, like carrying a piece of sunlight against the encroaching darkness. What about backup? Miguel asked. What if something goes wrong? You and Raymond will monitor from outside. Esperanza explained. You will be able to see Elena and Vincent, but you won't be able to intervene directly. If Elena fails to break the loop, you will need to evacuate the area immediately. Evacuate how far? At least 50 miles. When the barrier fails, the release of trapped energy will be significant. Elena spent the next 2 hours studying Vincent's account, memorizing details about his life, his family, his death. She read about his marriage to Dorothy, their quiet happiness, his work at the hardware store. She studied photographs of him from his later years, a man who'd found peace after his terrifying encounter with the supernatural. As midnight approached on July 23rd, Elena found herself unable to sleep. She walked the aisles of her fuel station, checking inventory and organizing displays to keep her hands busy while her mind raced. The normalcy of the tasks, counting energy drinks, restocking beef jerky, cleaning coffee pots, felt surreal when contrasted with the cosmic battle she'd be fighting in 36 hours. At 2:14 a.m., she found herself watching the security monitors, half expecting to see Vincent's red Peterbilt pulling into the parking lot. But the lot remained empty, and Elena realized she was experiencing what Vincent must feel, the compulsive need to return to a significant moment, to relive a crucial choice. She forced herself to step away from the monitors and focus on the present. Miguel arrived at 6 a.m. to take over the day shift, allowing Elena to get some rest before the final confrontation. Any second thoughts? He asked, as she gathered her keys. Hundreds. But I'm still going through with it. Elena drove home to her apartment and tried to nap, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself thinking about all the truckers who'd vanished over the years. People with families, dreams, mortgages, children who still waited for phone calls that would never come. If she succeeded, Vincent would finally find peace. If she failed, the highways would become hunting grounds for an army of the lost. The afternoon of July 24th passed in a blur of final preparations. Esperanza arrived with additional supplies and spent several hours explaining the ritual in detail. Elena would need to approach Vincent's truck at exactly 2:00 a.m., place her hands on the hood, and allow herself to be drawn partially into his timeline. "You will exist in both realities simultaneously," Esperanza explained. "You will be able to see and interact with Vincent as he experiences that night in 1997. But you will also retain your knowledge of everything that happened afterward. What will I look like to him? Like someone who shouldn't be there. Someone who doesn't belong in 1997. That cognitive dissonance will be your opening. The crack through which you can introduce information from outside his loop." Elena practiced the incantation. Esperanza had taught her, a mixture of Spanish and what sounded like much older languages. The words felt strange on her tongue, but Esperanza assured her that meaning mattered more than perfect pronunciation. "The barrier between realities is thinnest at 2:14 a.m., Esperanza said. "That's when Vincent's timeline and ours overlap most closely. You will have exactly 14 minutes to break through his conditioning and help him remember." What if he doesn't want to remember? What if he's more comfortable in the loop than facing the truth about his death? Then we all pay the price for his cowardice. As evening fell on July 24th, Elena closed her station early and spent the night in preparation. Miguel and Raymond arrived at midnight, setting up observation equipment and communication devices. Esperanza arranged her ritual materials in a precise pattern around the parking lot, creating what she called a containment circle. "No matter what happens during the ritual," she warned them, "do not cross into the circle until it's over. If you interfere, you could destabilize both timelines." At 1:30 a.m. on July 25th, Elena took her position at the edge of the parking lot. The desert wind had picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and something else, something that reminded her of ozone and copper pennies. The air itself felt charged, as if a thunderstorm were approaching, though the sky remained clear. "Remember," Esperanza called from her position outside the circle, "focus on the crystals if you feel yourself slipping. Don't let his reality overwrite yours." Elena checked her watch. 1:45 a.m. Somewhere in the space between seconds, Vincent Kellerman was beginning his eternal journey toward this moment. In the distance, she could see headlights approaching from the west. Headlights that belonged to a truck that had been destroyed in a junkyard 15 years ago, driven by a man who'd been dead for 4 years. She reached into the leather pouch and grasped one of the glowing crystals. Its warmth spread up her arm and into her chest, anchoring her to this moment, this choice, this reality, where dead men didn't drive trucks and time moved in one direction only. But tonight, those rules would be suspended. Tonight, she would step outside the normal flow of time and attempt to save a soul that had been trapped between heartbeats for 26 years. The headlights grew brighter, and Elena could now see the distinctive profile of Vincent's red Peterbilt. As it approached, she noticed details that shouldn't exist. The truck looked exactly as it had in 1997, down to the specific pattern of road dust on the windshield and the particular way the left headlight aimed slightly too high. At exactly 2:30 a.m., Elena placed her hands on the truck's hood. The world exploded into fragments of light and sound, and suddenly she was standing in two places at once in her parking lot in 2023, and in the same parking lot as it had existed 26 years ago. The sensation was disorienting, like trying to watch two movies projected on the same screen. Vincent climbed down from his cab, and Elena could see the confusion in his eyes as he noticed her. She was an anachronism in his 1997 reality, a woman wearing modern clothing, standing next to technology that wouldn't be invented for years. "Vincent," she called out, her voice echoing strangely in the overlapping timelines. "We need to talk." He froze, his hand still on the truck's door handle. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" I'm someone who knows what happens next. I know about Sanctuary Junction, about the choice you are going to make, about everything that comes after. Vincent's face cycled through confusion, fear, and a dawning recognition that something was fundamentally wrong with this moment. This isn't how it happened before, because it's not before, Vincent. It's 26 years later, and you have been trapped in this moment ever since you escaped from Sanctuary Junction. Elena stepped closer, the crystals in her pouch pulsing with warm light. Around them, reality continued to flicker between 1997 and 2023, creating a dreamlike landscape where past and present existed simultaneously. You are going to see lights in the desert, she continued. You are going to turn off the highway to investigate. You will find a truck stop that shouldn't exist, full of drivers who have forgotten how to stop driving. But here's what you don't remember. You escape. You choose to leave. Vincent's eyes widened, and Elena could see memories struggling to surface through the fog of temporal displacement. I remember driving away. But that can't be right. I'm still here. You drove away, and you lived. You married Dorothy Patterson in 1999. You worked at Riverside Hardware for 22 years. You had a quiet, happy life until you died of a heart attack in Dorothy? Vincent's voice cracked with emotion. She wouldn't. She loved you. You were happy together. You bought a house with a white picket fence and a garden where she grew tomatoes every summer. Elena reached into her jacket and pulled out a photograph. Esperanza had given her Vincent and Dorothy on their wedding day, both smiling with the kind of joy that couldn't be faked. Vincent stared at the photo, and Elena watched as 26 years of suppressed memories began to flood back. She's dead, isn't she? He whispered. If I died 26 months ago, peacefully, in her sleep. She kept your account of that night hidden for 26 years. But before she died, she made sure it would reach someone who could help you. Vincent looked around at the overlapping realities, finally understanding his situation. I'm trapped. That's why I keep coming back here. I'm stuck in the moment I chose to investigate those lights. But you don't have to be. You can choose again, Vincent. You can choose to remember your life, your love, your death. You can choose to move on. Vincent stared at the photograph for a long moment, and Elena could see him struggling with the decision. In the distance, she heard the rumble of diesel engines, the convoy from Sanctuary Junction coming to reclaim their escaped prisoner. They are coming for me, Vincent said. Only if you let them. You have the power to break this loop, Vincent. You just have to choose to remember instead of forgetting. The rumble grew louder, and Elena could see headlights approaching from all directions, trucks that existed in the spaces between reality, driven by men who'd forgotten everything except the endless road. Vincent looked at her, then at the photograph, then at the approaching convoy. When he spoke, his voice was strong and clear. I choose to remember. Barstow, California, July 22, 11. Temperature, 71.52. Unnaturally still air. Reality fracturing. The moment Vincent Kellerman spoke those 4 words, I choose to remember, the desert around Elena Vasquez exploded into chaos. The overlapping timelines, which had been flickering gently between 1997 and 2023, suddenly began violent convulsions. The parking lot strobed between past and present like a broken film projector, and the approaching convoy of supernatural trucks accelerated toward them with the fury of wounded predators. Elena felt the crystals in her leather pouch burning against her side, their heat intensifying as they fought to keep her anchored in the present. Through the temporal storm, she watched Vincent's face transform as 26 years of suppressed memories crashed through his consciousness like a dam bursting. Dorothy, he whispered, and the name seemed to physically pain him. Our wedding day, the house on Maple Street, her garden, the way she laughed when I tried to fix the garbage disposal, his eyes filled with tears that shouldn't exist. Dead men didn't cry, but Vincent was remembering what it meant to be alive. The convoy was close enough now that Elena could see the drivers' faces through their windshields. They were exactly as Vincent had described in his account, blank, staring, caught in eternal waiting. But now their expressions had changed. Where before there had been empty patience, now there was desperate hunger. They knew their escaped prisoner was slipping away, and they were coming to reclaim him. "Vincent, we have to go," Elena shouted over the growing roar of diesel engines. "They are almost here." But Vincent wasn't listening. He was staring at his own hands, watching as they began to change. The weathered, calloused palms of a 42-year-old trucker were aging rapidly, showing the passage of years he'd missed while trapped in the loop. Liver spots appeared, wrinkles deepened, and his thick black hair began to silver. "I can feel it," he said, in wonder. "I can feel my whole life. 22 years at the hardware store, teaching Dorothy to drive my old pickup. The heart attack in the garden while I was pruning her roses." Elena grabbed his arm, and her touch seemed to accelerate the process. Vincent's body was catching up to his chronological age, integrating decades of experiences that had been locked away by supernatural forces. "Remember later," Elena said urgently. "Right now, we need to survive." The first truck in the convoy, a black Kenworth with no visible driver, reached the edge of Esperanza's containment circle. The moment its bumper crossed the mystical barrier, a sound like breaking glass echoed across the desert. Cracks of brilliant white light appeared in the air itself, spreading outward from the point of contact. The barriers failing, Elena heard Esperanza shout from somewhere outside the temporal storm. "Whatever you are going to do it now." Vincent looked at the approaching trucks, then at Elena, then at the photograph of his wedding day that he still clutched in his rapidly aging hands. "They want me to forget again. They want me to join the convoy and hunt other drivers. You don't have to. You can choose differently. But if I refuse, if I truly break free, what happens to all the others? The drivers trapped at Sanctuary Junction?" Elena felt her connection to 2023 wavering as the temporal disturbance intensified. The crystals were still warm, but she could feel herself being pulled deeper into Vincent's timeline. "I don't know, but you can't save them by sacrificing yourself." Vincent studied the approaching convoy with the eyes of a man who'd spent 15 years on the road, reading traffic patterns and predicting driver behavior. "There are 12 trucks. Based on the pattern of their approach, they are not just hunting me, they are surrounding us." Elena looked around and realized he was right. The supernatural vehicles had spread out in a perfect circle, cutting off all escape routes. Their headlights created a cage of light around the fuel station, and the diesel rumble was so loud now that she could feel it in her bones. "They are not going to let us leave," she said. "No, but maybe that's not the point." Vincent looked at her with eyes that held decades of accumulated wisdom. "You said I escaped from Sanctuary Junction 26 years ago. How?" Elena tried to remember the details from Vincent's written account. "You drove away. You chose to leave instead of staying. But why was I able to leave when none of the others could?" The question hung in the air as the convoy tightened their circle. Elena could see the drivers now. Dozens of men in various stages of supernatural preservation, their faces blank and their eyes reflecting nothing but highway lights. "Because you still remembered something," Elena realized. "You hadn't been on the road long enough to forget everything else. You still had connections to the real world." Vincent nodded. 15 years versus some of these drivers who'd been out here for decades. I still remembered why I'd started driving in the first place, to support my family, to build a life. Most of the others had forgotten everything except the highway. The circle of trucks had stopped moving, their engines idling in perfect synchronization. Through their windshields, Elena could see the drivers turning to look directly at Vincent, their movements unnaturally coordinated. "They are waiting for something," she observed. "For me to choose. Just like that night 26 years ago, I have to decide whether to join them or resist." Elena felt the temporal disturbance reaching a crescendo. Reality was fracturing around them, showing glimpses of multiple timelines. The 1997 night when Vincent first encountered the supernatural, every October 13th when he'd returned to relive that moment, and the present crisis that would determine the fate of every highway in America. What happens if you choose to join them? The loop continues, but stronger. My resistance has been keeping the barrier stable, holding Sanctuary Junction in its pocket dimension. If I stop fighting, if I accept their call, the containment fails completely. Elena understood, and all the trapped drivers are released onto the highways. 1,200 supernatural trucks hunting for new victims every night. The interstate system becomes a feeding ground. The convoy's engines suddenly revved in unison, a sound like thunder rolling across the desert. Elena felt the noise in her chest, in her skull, in her soul. It was a call that spoke to something primal, something that whispered about the freedom of the endless road and the peace of never having to make another choice. I can feel it, Vincent said, his voice dreamy. The call, it's so easy to just let go, to stop fighting and join the convoy. No more choices, no more pain, no more memories of everything I have lost. Elena saw his resolve wavering and grabbed his shoulders. But you will also lose everything you have gained. Your memories of Dorothy, your life together, the knowledge that you found happiness after the road. She's dead. My life is over. What's the point of holding on to memories of something that's gone? Because those memories are real. They happened. You loved and were loved. And that matters even after death. Vincent looked at the convoy, then at Elena, then at the photograph that had triggered his flood of recovered memories. But what about the others? The drivers trapped at Sanctuary Junction? Don't they deserve a chance at freedom? Elena felt something shift in the temporal storm around them. The question wasn't just philosophical. Vincent's choice would literally determine the fate of hundreds of lost souls. Not if their freedom means destroying innocent people, she said. You can't save them by unleashing them on the world. Then what can I do? Elena looked at the circle of supernatural trucks, at the cracks spreading through reality, at the man who'd been trapped between heartbeats for 26 years. An idea began to form, dangerous, probably impossible, but the only solution she could see. What if you didn't choose between joining them and resisting them? What if you chose something else entirely? Vincent's eyes sharpened with interest. What do you mean? You escaped Sanctuary Junction once by choosing to leave. What if this time you chose to go back, not as a prisoner, but as someone who remembers what it means to be free? The convoy's engines growled ominously, sensing a shift in the conversation. Elena could see the drivers leaning forward in their seats, their blank faces showing the first signs of emotion she'd witnessed. Concern, even fear. Go back to try to free the others? You said most of them had been on the road so long they'd forgotten everything except the highway. But you remember now. You remember what it feels like to have a home, a purpose beyond just driving. Maybe you could help them remember too. Vincent considered this, and Elena could see the idea taking hold. It would be incredibly dangerous. If I can't reach them, if their conditioning is too strong, I'd just become trapped again, permanently this time. But if you could reach even some of them, the fewer drivers trapped at Sanctuary Junction, the weaker its hold on our reality. If I could free enough of them, the whole place might collapse. Elena felt the crystals in her pouch pulsing faster, warning her that her time in Vincent's timeline was running out. You have to decide now. The temporal barrier won't hold much longer. Vincent looked one more time at the photograph of his wedding day, then carefully folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. If I do this, if I go back to Sanctuary Junction, I need you to promise me something. What? If I fail, if I become trapped like the others, don't try to rescue me. Don't let anyone else try. Just make sure this place is watched. Make sure no one else gets pulled in. Elena wanted to argue, but she could see the determination in his eyes. Vincent Kellerman had made his choice, and it was the choice of a man who'd remembered what it meant to love something more than himself. "I promise," she said. Vincent walked toward his red Peterbilt, and as he moved, Elena noticed that his truck was changing too. The pristine 1997 condition was aging, showing the wear and weathering that 26 years should have brought. By the time he reached the driver's door, it looked exactly like the truck that had been scrapped in 2008. Faded paint, worn chrome, the accumulated damage of a lifetime on the road. "Tell Esperanza," Vincent called back to her. "Tell her that some roads lead to redemption, but you have to be willing to drive them alone." He climbed into his cab, and Elena heard the diesel engine turn over with a sound like thunder. The convoy immediately responded, their engines revving to match his rhythm. But instead of the hostile sound Elena had been hearing, the engine noise now carried something different. Hope, perhaps, or at least the possibility of change. Vincent put his truck in gear and drove directly toward the black Kenworth that blocked the eastern exit from the parking lot. Elena expected a collision, but at the moment of contact, both trucks simply passed through each other like intersecting beams of light. The entire convoy began to move, following Vincent's lead. They formed up behind his Peterbilt in perfect formation, and Elena realized they weren't hunting him anymore. They were following him. He'd become their leader, the one driver who remembered what they'd all forgotten. As the supernatural convoy pulled onto the highway, Elena felt the temporal storm beginning to subside. The overlapping timelines stabilized, the cracks in reality sealed themselves, and the normal sounds of the desert night returned. She was standing alone in her parking lot in 2023, watching taillights disappear into the darkness. But these weren't the random scattered lights of individual trucks. They moved in perfect formation, heading west toward a destination that existed in the spaces between reality. Vincent was leading them home, back to Sanctuary Junction, where he would face the ultimate test of his recovered humanity. Esperanza appeared at Elena's side, having crossed into the now safe containment circle. "It's done." Vincent chose to go back. "He's trying to free the others from the inside." "That's not what I expected. But perhaps it's the only way." Esperanza began gathering her ritual materials, her movements efficient and purposeful. The temporal barrier is stable again, but changed. Whatever happens next will happen at Sanctuary Junction itself. Elena watched the last of the taillights disappear into the distance. "How will we know if he succeeded?" "We will know." Miguel and Raymond emerged from their observation post, both looking shaken by what they'd witnessed. "Elena, are you all right?" Miguel called out. "I think so." Elena checked herself carefully. The crystals in her pouch had returned to a gentle warmth, and she felt solidly anchored in the present moment. "I think I'm back where I belong." "What happens now?" Raymond asked. Elena looked out at the empty highway, then at her fuel station, then at the people who'd risked everything to help her save a dead man's soul. "Now we wait, and we watch, and we make sure no one else gets lost on the highway between here and there." Over the following weeks, Elena researched every missing trucker case she could find, cross-referencing dates and locations with the pattern Esperanza had identified. She created a database, a warning system, a network of truck stops and highway patrol officers who knew to watch for certain signs. But as July turned to August, and August to September, the missing persons reports stopped. For the first time in decades, no long-haul truckers vanished on the desert highways of the American Southwest. On October 13, 2023, Elena closed her fuel station early and drove to mile marker 24/7 on I-40. She parked on the shoulder and waited, watching the empty desert for any sign of lights that shouldn't exist. At exactly 2:14 a.m., she saw them, not the bright, welcoming glow of Sanctuary Junction, but something else, a distant flicker, like a star going supernova. It pulsed once, twice, 3 times, then faded completely. Elena never saw it again. 6 months later, she received a package with no return address. Inside was a photograph, a group shot of men standing in front of a truck stop, all of them smiling with the particular joy of people who'd just remembered something important. In the center of the group stood Vincent Kellerman, looking exactly as he had on his wedding day, his arm around a heavy-set man with a graying beard, who wore a Peterbilt cap. On the back of the photograph, in Vincent's careful handwriting, was a single word: free. Elena framed the photograph and hung it behind the counter of her fuel station, where it served as a reminder that some journeys have destinations worth reaching, even if the road there leads through the spaces between reality. The desert kept its secrets, but it no longer kept its prisoners. Sanctuary Junction had become something else, not a trap for lost souls, but a way station for those who'd finally remembered how to stop driving. And on clear nights, when the wind was still and the highway was empty, Elena sometimes thought she could hear the distant sound of diesel engines, not hunting, not pursuing, but simply traveling toward whatever comes after the endless road. The highway never truly ends, but sometimes, if you are very fortunate and very brave, you can choose where to stop driving. Elena Vasquez kept that choice alive for every trucker who passed through her station, offering not just fuel and coffee, but the reminder that there were still places in the world where lost travelers could remember their way home. The road goes on forever, but the journey always has an end, for those wise enough to recognize it when it arrives. Epilogue. 1 year later, Elena received a letter from the Transportation History Museum in Pomona. They were planning a memorial exhibit for missing truckers, and they'd found something in Vincent Kellerman's donated papers that they thought she should see. It was a route map of the southwestern United States, hand-drawn with meticulous care. Every highway was marked, every truck stop noted, every rest area documented, but scattered across the map were small annotations in Vincent's handwriting, coordinates that didn't correspond to any known locations. The museum curator included a note: "We have checked these coordinates against satellite imagery, and they all show empty desert. But the interesting thing is, when we cross-reference them with missing persons reports, every single coordinate corresponds to the last known location of a vanished trucker." Elena studied the map for hours, tracing the patterns Vincent had identified. There were 17 locations in total, scattered across 7 states. 17 places where the barrier between realities had worn thin, where drivers who'd lost their way could slip through the cracks. All 17 coordinates now showed nothing but empty desert on satellite images. Whatever had existed at those locations was gone, closed down, sealed off. Vincent's final journey had been more successful than Elena had dared to hope. She locked the map in her office safe, along with the photograph of the freed truckers and Vincent's original account of his 1997 encounter. Some knowledge was too dangerous to share widely, but too important to destroy. On quiet nights, when her fuel station was empty and the desert stretched endlessly in all directions, Elena would take out the map and trace those 17 locations with her finger. Each mark represented drivers who would never come home, families who would never have closure, mysteries that would remain forever unsolved. But they also represented something else. Proof that even in a universe vast and strange enough to contain places like Sanctuary Junction, human choice still mattered. Love still mattered. The decision to remember rather than forget, to fight rather than surrender, to save others rather than save yourself. Vincent Kellerman had made those choices, and in making them he'd ensured that no other driver would face the same dark crossroads that had once threatened to trap him forever. The desert kept its secrets, but it no longer kept its prisoners, and that, Elena thought as she locked the map away again, was miracle enough for one lifetime. The end.